One of the chosen few folks on TikTok who was blessed with the long comment ability left a really interesting and insightful comment on one of my videos, and I couldn't actually do a video reply to it. It wouldn't let me because it's like this long. So I had to leave a comment below where I said, I want to reply to this with a video because you make really good points. I'll try to get around to it in a little bit. The video where she left that comment was one where I was responding to a woman who basically said that white women, such as ourselves, have the ability to shift the optics, to change the way that people perceive what especially ICE is doing, especially to immigrants who are non-white. She was saying, we as white women, we're more protected, and so we can get in between ICE and the immigrants that they are brutalizing, kidnapping, disappearing. And that prompted a video response for me, actually a couple of video responses where I was like, so if we are going to be engaging in that way, if that's a risk that you are wanting to take, please don't do it spontaneously. We want our resistance efforts to be effective, right? We don't want our emotional outbursts. We don't want our impromptu decisions, right? Our snap decisions to actually undermine the cause and potentially make the situation worse. If we're going to take risks, then they need to be ones where there is a payoff, that we don't go into these situations just winging it. We need to game out everything that is happening. And again, you can go back and watch. I have like 3 videos on this subject now. Effective resistance is strategic. It is carefully planned. But this commenter was specifically referencing the original poster's video and how she was claiming that white women are protected in this society. Now, we know there is this public perception of white women as damsels in distress, and we are all enculturated to be more sympathetic to white women, to perceive white women as victims. And that also, unfortunate for the state, applies to them. When they are violent toward white women, the public outcry is much larger. Their actions are now perceived as more brutal, as more cruel, and more out of line with what people want from society and law enforcement. And so the original poster was saying we should use that to our advantage. We have the privilege of being protected as white women, and we also have this public perception about us, so that when ICE is brutalizing, especially brown people, there's not that much of a public outcry, right? It's the same way when the police brutalize Black people. It doesn't get that much of a rise out of most Americans, unfortunately, because, racism. But, if the cops or ICE are brutalizing somebody who looks like your average white suburban soccer mom or some sweet little old white grandma, then suddenly that is going to be perceived very differently and potentially far more negatively by the public. So the point here is, in a situation where normally we would see the cultural perception of white women as damsels in distress as, one, obviously a product of racism, but 2, in a more nuanced way of understanding it, a product of racism and the patriarchy working together, where white women have carved out a measure of safety for ourselves, where we are perceived as weaker, as more likely to be a victim, and therefore white men will want to protect us. Now, typically that works as white men protecting us from non-white people, right? It is a tool of racism. It infantilizes women so that white men have an excuse to be violent toward people who are not white. Well, and to an extent, also poor white people, right? There's an element of classism there as well. And you could argue about the ways that white women benefit from that construct, but also you could say, well, this is a system where white women are oppressed, and the only way that many white women have found to keep themselves safe from the violence of white men is to turn white men's rage onto other people. That does not make it right at all. That doesn't make it right. But what the original poster is saying, okay, here is this harmful dynamic that was created by white supremacy and the patriarchy, and it hurts people of color. It also ultimately hurts women as well. It's used to control women, to keep us weak and powerless, but it's also used in some ways to keep us safe, and it's definitely used to keep white men in power. And she was like, how can we use that actually to our benefit here? How can we take all the fucked up things about the system and use them as tools that we leverage against the system? And I think that's a really good point. And again, you should go watch my previous videos where I'm like, hey, let's just pump the brakes on just leaping headfirst into a situation when we have not carefully planned what we're doing and assessed the risks and benefits. But now, 4.5 minutes in, let me get to this person's comment because she had something interesting to say. I told you she was blessed with the long comment. Zoe says, I appreciate the desire to stand up when harm is being done, and it is necessary, and I want to offer a reflection that may feel uncomfortable but comes from love and deep witnessing. Whiteness isn't a shield. It has functioned like one for some, for a time, but that's never meant safety. It's meant complicity in systems that discard anyone, even white folks, when they stop being useful. When people are encouraged to use their whiteness as a shield, they may enter spaces thinking they're protected, only to falter when they realize that they're not. And that hesitation has cost lives. We've seen it again and again. Stand up, yes, but not because you think you're protected. Stand up because you've realized you're not separate. Stand up because you understand. Stand up because solidarity, not saviorism, is the only real shield we've ever had. So I would love to know what you think about that. I think that Zoe raises some really good points there. Particularly, I think about the ways that when white women stand up against the system, are willing to stand up for people more vulnerable than them, are willing to stand up for women's rights, that we are often denigrated. We are often treated like we are less than human, right? So that we no longer fall under the class of protected white women. The act of standing up against a system that we are supposed to be upholding very much can rapidly shift people's perception of us. And maybe this is a conversation for another time, but you'll notice that there's a very specific aesthetic amongst Trumpers, which is not that different from an evangelical aesthetic, although maybe just like a little bit more sexualized. But there's a reason that skinny is back in. There's a reason that certain hairstyles and makeup and ways of dressing are back in. That is for those women to fit into that very narrow range of the kind of acceptable woman that will fill that role of damsel in distress, that will uphold the patriarchy and give men an excuse to brutalize everybody else in the name of protecting women. And if you don't look like that, if you look differently, if you talk differently, if you don't talk like this, if you are not appropriately submissive, if you are not demonstrating, performing gender in a way that conforms to what the system expects out of the damsel in distress, if you are acting like an adult woman with agency instead of a damsel, if you are standing up and fighting instead of swooning and fainting, the system and the people who benefit from it and uphold it will very quickly revoke your status as a protected person. But I don't think that discounts what the original creator was saying, that if you choose to stand up, especially if you fit the visual perception of a protected white woman, and there are photos, there's video, there's social media coverage of you being brutalized by the police, by ICE, by this regime. That does have significant impact on the public, and I think it very much can shift the optics. Do I think that it is white women's job to sacrifice our bodies and risk being brutalized and risk being arrested and facing federal charges? It's not my job to tell you what your risk is in that regard. And it's definitely not my job to encourage you to engage in civil disobedience or break the law. That's something you get to decide for yourself. That's something that you should probably talk to an attorney about before you decide to script that out. Also, again, I've said this in the past, acts of civil disobedience, even just like acts of disruption, those are not to be done in isolation. You have to do those in coordination and with consent of the other people that are there protesting with you or resisting with you, because your act may endanger them. And it would not be right to make that decision unilaterally by yourself and endanger the people around you. Which is why I get really mad at agitators at protests, because they're always risking the police brutalizing the most vulnerable people that are there demonstrating peacefully. Right, and this is why this conversation is more nuanced, because the original creator had really good points, and I think Zoe here has really good points. Because if you launch yourself into one of these scenarios and you think, like, I've got Kevlar and Teflon, I have full-on body armor because I'm a white woman, and then you get into that scenario and you can't flex your privilege, it's not working. What are you going to do then? Remember when I said if you are wanting to engage in these kinds of acts, that you need to game it out about what happens if it goes sideways? You need to be prepared for that. We all should be prepared for what happens if we are used to having privilege and protection within the system. But now, as we are standing up against it, we may see very quickly that that privilege is withdrawn. And then how are we going to behave? So good conversations. I think these are important things to really dig into and to wrestle with, and it helps shape our resistance more effectively.